Welcome everyone. We're going to give this another shot here. I appreciate everybody's patience while we worked through some technical difficulties here. Without any further ado, we'll hop right in. Now that I have multiple screens, I'll be able to and a better internet connection. I will be able to see the chat window. Please feel free to throw any questions that you have in there. Also, the presentation should leave about 5 minutes at the end if you have any questions at that point. So with that being said, we're going to hop right in here. Let me bring up my timer just so I can make sure I'm not going to run over. All right. It's 5 a.m. Your data is gone. How did we get here? So the idea behind this is we're going to just go through, a brief sort of exercise in looking at the different ways two separate companies handled some remediation planning and how that affected some downstream controls and results. So, obligatory disclaimer here: the presentation and the information contained within are not intended in whole or in part to be reflective of risks, practices, or internal information of Uber or Uber systems, policies, or procedures. Any data contained in this presentation is purely hypothetical and used for demonstration purposes only. This presentation is not a substitute for legal advice, nor does it cover all aspects of any law or regulation discussed. Any law or regulation discussed is subject to change. So just a quick little note about me. You can see I've got a little bit of alphabet soup after my name there. I probably shouldn't have put so many of these certifications, and I did leave a few out, for modesty's sake. You'll note that a lot of these are privacy, with one of them being risk. So I got my start in cybersecurity and then moved into the privacy space. And I see the gap between privacy, which we typically look at from the consumer protection standpoint, and the cybersecurity side, which is typically more focused on the business. Could definitely have some aspects of like personal data protection, but it's usually looked at from the lens of like risk to the business as opposed to risk to the individual. But I see the gap between these two growing smaller and smaller, and I'm just kind of working through my career trying to make sure that gap is as small as possible. So, diving right in, you are dead asleep. Your phone rings and you say, "I don't want to answer that," but after about the fifth or sixth call, you decide to pick it up. So it's 5 a.m. What do we know? We know that data was exfiltrated from the primary server containing all the consumer data, a bunch of different personal data identifiers, financial data, profiling data used by marketing. It's unclear how much data was stolen. Only that this new vulnerability called skeleton key was used to access and exfiltrate the data. Skeleton key is 100% made up. I made it up last week when I built this presentation out, so I would not go searching for that in your environment. So we're going to take a look at a couple of different companies and the professionals that work at these companies. We have Company A, who has hired Adeyashun. He is a cybersecurity engineer, very, very knowledgeable. He's been tasked with bringing the most important risk to the board for decisions on what should be remediated and when. And then you have Company B with Allison, who is a risk advisor. She is also tasked with bringing the most important risks to the board for decisions on remediation. So when we're looking at these two individuals, the primary difference between them is Adeyashun is very technical and understands the systems in question inside and out. He knows cybersecurity is the law. There's no question about it. Allison, on the other hand, is a dedicated risk professional who has a limited technical understanding of the systems, but understands the control environment, risk methodology, and the business. So here we are. It's 5 a.m. There's a breach today. So how did we get here? So that's what we really want to focus on as part of this session. You see a lot of sessions with like, hey, here's a breach. Let's walk through like the incident response and like, let's figure out with our 2020 hindsight what we could have done better. So the difference here being a look at the approach when we're trying to remediate identified gaps and risks in your technology environment. So before we continue, I want to cover these classic cybersecurity archetypes, and hopefully you'll be able to see as we move along here how these profiles sort of fit our two professionals at companies A and B. So you have your Crusader and your Counselor. I used to call this cowboys and businessmen, but let's be a little more inclusive. So I ripped this straight out of a Dungeons and Dragons alignment chart because nerds. Um, of which I am one. If it wasn't clear from the fact that I referenced a D&D book in a conference presentation. So Crusaders are typically very, very technical people. They know infrastructure, application systems inside and out. They're well versed in threat actors, particularly vulnerabilities, but they also tend to have this personality trait of like cybersecurity is law. I'll never forget. I was interviewing a candidate a number of years ago at a different company, and I remember them saying this and stuck out so thoroughly to me that I mean, 5, 6 years later, I still think about this person saying cybersecurity is law. So they're known for being inflexible. No threat or vulnerability can be ignored. And what ends up happening with the Crusader type is, despite the fact that they have a reputation for being extraordinarily knowledgeable, they're typically ignored by the senior leadership, the executive leadership, your C-suites, right? Because they they have the burden of knowing too much. They have seen what can go wrong. They've seen the small vulnerability turn into the big data breach. So they have this burden of knowledge allows them to see down all these different forks and paths that could possibly happen over the course of your data protection environment. Uh, so everything turns out to be a really, really big deal. The sky is falling all the time. Then you have your counselor type. Very limited technical skills, usually ranging from insignificant to moderate. If you find a counselor who has very in-depth technical skills, you should pay them lots and lots of money because they are few and far between. Um, so they're rarely at the level of the Crusader. They understand the infrastructure applications, etc., but maybe not necessarily how all the pieces fit together. They understand threat actors and gaps, but not at the level of the Crusader. So we're dealing with somebody who is essentially just not as knowledgeable as the Crusader. However, they are well versed in business context, objectives, and budgets, and risk methodology. That's super, super, super important for the counselors, understanding the business objectives, budgets, and how risk methodology actually works. So the counselor type is actually seen pretty often as a hindrance by the Crusader type, because the Crusader type will kick a door down and say the house is on fire, and the counselor will look around and say, I don't see smoke, I don't smell smoke, maybe it's not on fire. And the Crusader tends to have a high level of burnout because of this, because folks who understand risk to a deeper level are telling them this isn't that big of a deal, and they've seen too much to know that that can't possibly be the case. The counselor, however, is very, very good at championing the correct mitigation for risks. So we're going to take a step back to January 1st, 2022. Adeyashun at Company A has identified through his subscriptions and expertise this vulnerability called skeleton key, which would allow for data exfiltration. He marks this as critical. He also identifies a lone server with personal data on it. The system needs several patches but can't be taken down long enough to complete. He marks this as critical. Daeshun also notes that in his report that the current policy regarding the handling of personal data is incomplete. And as we all know, policy is extraordinarily important to the foundation of how we operate within a business and the standards by which we hold ourselves accountable. So he sees this as very important, so he marks this as critical. Allison, on the other hand, takes a different approach. So remember, these are two different companies, but almost an identical environment here. So Allison connects with her colleagues because she is not as knowledgeable in the vulnerability management space to understand this new skeleton key. It only exists on a small number of servers, most of which are not critical, save for the one which holds all the consumer data. She marks this as high pending other remediation. She also identifies a server with personal data on it. The system needs several patches, but it can't be taken down. However, after some digging, she realizes that most data on the server is well outside the retention threshold set by policy, and she marks this as critical. She also notes that the policy is incomplete, but it is reflective of current practices, and that remediation would be expensive and time-consuming. She marks this as medium. So we have a Daeshun's plan here. You can see that he has the vulnerability, the data server, and the policy, and they're all marked as critical. Is my audio cut? Okay, never mind. The green bars are moving now. So when we take a look at Allison's plan, you can see that there is a little more nuance here. You can see that she has a critical, a high, and a medium. So these are two very different approaches. One is the Crusader and one is the Counsellor. The Crusader has set everything as critical, and the Counsellor has a number of different remediation plans ready to go. So before we continue on here, I'd like to talk a little bit about risk analysis methodologies, because the whole point here is, I'm sure most of the folks here understand risk well enough. I do genuinely believe that it should be a core requirement of anybody working in cybersecurity. If you have not at least studied the CRISC material or another similar risk certification, you're really doing yourself and your company a disservice. So when we're talking about selling our senior leadership, our C-suite, etc., we have more or less three different risk analysis methodologies. You have on your left your quantitative, on your right you have your qualitative, and in the center you have your semi-quantitative. Now, gaining buy-in from leadership is less effective when you use a qualitative approach, because it is not really based on numbers. It's more based on gut instincts, professional experience, and it's very subjective. So the qualitative analysis is really where our Crusader type thrives, because they can look at something and say, hey, I know that this is a big deal, we should go fix it. On the other hand, you have your quantitative approach. Your quantitative approach is the best approach you could possibly take. It's based on numerical calculations. It's very easy to go through the data and understand how you came to a specific conclusion. There are very few questions that you won't have answers to. However, the amount of data that is required for you to have a fully quantitative approach is more than most organizations are going to have on hand. So we're talking about spending months, if not years, gathering data for a single risk assessment, and not to mention the thousands, if not millions of dollars to be able to do that. So our best approach here is to use a semi-quantitative approach. Use numbers for everything that you can use numbers for, and where you can't, that's where you use your qualitative approach in your experience as a professional to sort of fill those gaps in. These can be used a lot more with like the likelihood. Like we'll use numbers for the impact, but the likelihood we'll use like more of like a qualitative approach, etc. And one thing that I would like to point out as a word of caution is there are many leaders who may or may not have a thorough understanding of risk that may attempt to lower your risk ratings because of what they would like to implement, or more dangerously, what the organization owns with no plans of implementation. So just as an off-the-cuff example, this would be like, you spend a bunch of time building out a data loss prevention system within your email gateway, and you rate the risk of data loss prevention as being high. But somebody in senior leadership says, well, we have data loss prevention. You built all of this stuff out, but it's not on. And if there's no plans to turn it on, if there's no plans to roll it out, then I mean, how are we going to lower the risk? And in addition, I think it's really, really important to note that simply the idea of having something on a roadmap is also not sufficient to lower the risk in a given area. The risk has to be based on currently operating controls. So you'll see this a lot where where somebody from senior leadership says, "Oh, well, we're gonna fix this in Q1 of next year, so we can lower the risk on that." We all know the priority shuffle. You can't lower the risk on something based on the best laid plans of mice and men. So, kind of having gone through our different methodologies, you can see that Adeyashun used a very qualitative approach. You can see that Allison used more of a semi-quantitative approach. She did a bunch of interviews with people who know the systems inside and out, did all of her research, and then came back with this proposal. So Adeyashun believes that all three of the risks, the critical risks he identified, can be fixed one quarter at a time. But the very first thing, the most important thing, is we have to fix that vulnerability. That's what Adeyashun's telling us. Allison, on the other hand, thinks that the best thing to do would be to remediate this server with all this personal data on it. So her phased approach actually takes a total of 5 quarters as opposed to 3. So we're definitely talking more money here. But to remediate the biggest risk, she wants to delete data per policy. She wants to set up a new server and have all personal data stored on the new server with pointers as necessary from the other systems, and encrypt data on both. So these are a number of remediation steps which really only genuinely apply to the server. So she hasn't even come up with a plan for the rest of the stuff, because Allison knows that the server in question here is an actual genuine critical risk. So it's 5 a.m. What now? Based on the remediation proposals, which were both accepted by their senior leadership, Company A with Adeyashun had millions of consumer records exfiltrated. While Adeyashun correctly identified that the skeleton key vulnerability was important, he failed to understand the root cause. So because he didn't understand the root cause, he went to go fix the vulnerability, but he didn't account for the business's reliance on that system being available 24/7. So while the vulnerability was patched on all of the systems except for that critical server, it just remained open, and the skeleton key vulnerability that he correctly identified was still used and leveraged to be able to access the data on that server. Allison, on the other hand, understood risk methodology and ratings as well as the business needs. Over the course of 3 quarters, she was able to remove millions of records, which only created risk. So these are what we call rot records. So it's redundant, outdated, or trivial. So copies of records which are well outside of the retention period, or records which the business is no longer using. So think of like financial data. You typically go back 7 years. Anything more than 7 years, why do you have it? Why are you using that data still? Chances are you're not. Chances are nobody's touching it. So it's providing zero value to the business while creating risk to the business. Those are the kind of things that you should get rid of. As a matter of fact, if you are not deleting your personal data, you are making a huge mistake. Eventually you will get breached, and it's way better to have less data than more data. So while the remediation project that she was working on here was not fully completed, there were only a few dozen records, well below the threshold of actually having to notify any kind of like public authority. We're going to pretend they're not based in Europe. So So with so the data that was exfiltrated was either encrypted or a few of the records weren't, but it was a much more tolerable risk to the business. So to sort of kind of come back to what the whole point of this is we want you to be able to walk away and win with your senior leadership. This is something that is very, very difficult. It's something that I hear about all the time. And if I'm being completely honest, you hear it a lot more from the Crusader type than the Counsellor type, because, like I said, the Crusader type, they've seen too much. It's like having a pathologist have a child. So as soon as the kid coughs, they're like, oh, it's got to be the bubonic plague. They've just seen too much. So what ends up happening is they say, this is really bad, we need to fix it. This is really bad, we need to fix it. And the company continues to make decisions that are best for the company while not thoroughly explaining to our Crusader type why the thing that they want doesn't make any sense. So they just feel like they're being ignored, and nobody likes to feel like they're being ignored. So we want you to win with your senior leadership. And here are three very easy things that you can do. So the first thing is never go to your senior leadership with only problems. You want to come to them with solutions. And if we're being honest, don't be married to your solutions. It's more important to come with a well thought out, data driven solution that doesn't get chosen as the solution to fix the problem than it is to just come with problems. You don't want to be the person who's always just bringing problems to your senior leadership. The next thing, quick stories. Definitely ironic coming from somebody who has been rambling for the past 20 minutes in addition to another 25 from before. When we were having technical difficulties. But you have to understand that when you're going to senior leadership, you may be asking for a tool, you may be asking for more warm bodies to throw at a problem. But at the end of the day, what you're really asking for is money. So you want to tell a complete story that includes the impact of the organization, the gaps or problems, the solution, and make sure it's backed by data. Backing something by data is the best way to get buy-in. If you can't get your point across in less than 15 minutes, you've lost them. You have to remember that senior leadership is often very, very busy. It is not uncommon for somebody in the senior leadership space to show up 5-10 minutes late to a meeting or have to leave 5 to 10 minutes early. So if you are banking on an entire 30-minute meeting in order to get your point across, you've already lost the room. And the last thing I'll say here is accurate risk reporting. If everything's critical, nothing is critical. If everything is a problem, nothing is a problem. So you want to make sure, and I know that I've said this several times about being a chicken little, but I just want to make sure I'm really hammering this point home. When we have this chicken little scenario, the well of funding dries up very quickly, and it's very hard to get it back. So you want to make sure that you can articulate the problems easily, but that they are also correctly rated. So when we say a critical risk should be based on either a predefined limit that the business has, or if that does not exist, it needs to be a risk that puts the business or a significant portion of the business in jeopardy. If it is not one of those two things, it is not a critical risk. It doesn't matter how bad you think it could get. And if it is not putting the business in jeopardy or it is not exceeding previously defined risk thresholds, then it's not a critical risk. And it's honestly better to not list it as one, because despite the fact that your gut is telling you that it's a critical risk, if you don't have the data to back it up, the well will dry up and you will be seen as a chicken little, and none of us want that. So this is the last slide here. So if anybody has any questions that they want to ask, any questions, comments, concerns, please throw them in the chat, and I will answer them in our last about 5 minutes here. So a lot of these things I've hit pretty hard, but we're gonna say them one more time. When align your risk language. When you say critical, make sure you mean it. If everything is critical, then nothing is. You should trust your team, But it's also important. To verify that a risk is actually critical when they come to you and say that it's critical. Make sure that they have done their homework. Uh, Understand the business. If you are bringing risks to the business, and those risks don't impact the business objectives, there's a good chance that it's just going to be white noise. Um, so align the risks that you identify with business objectives and priorities. Internal audit. Internal audit is consistently, in my experience, viewed as like sort of an adversarial relationship. Like most folks view them as they're going to kick the door down and say, fix this stuff or prove us wrong. And then they're going to go tell on you to your bosses for not doing your job. However, if you have the opportunity to have a good relationship with your internal audit team, they're a group of dedicated risk professionals that can help you understand what the actual risk is associated with something, in addition to what the control gaps are. They can help you build out remediation plans, and they actually have they typically have a very, very good understanding of what the controls are across the entire business, or what the entire business is trying to accomplish, which makes your job significantly easier. And the last thing I'll say here is, it's always wise to address the root cause first when you are planning remediation. If you find a problem in one data set, it's more important to understand how that happened and to fix the how it happened than to simply just say, oh, I found this and we need to go fix it just in this one table, because chances are if it happened once, it's going to happen again. All right, so that is the end of my rant here. We've got about 4.5 minutes left. So does anybody have any questions, comments, concerns? Yes, no? Chat's looking pretty empty here. I don't see any questions. Thanks, Chuck. Oh, another Chuck. Thanks. Thanks, other Chuck. Um, all right. Well, unless anybody has anything that they want to throw in here, I can. Oh, okay. Tasnim, I apologize. I'm butchering your name. I know I am. So how do you manage risk management in small business? So it's so when we're looking at risk management for a small business, um, let's be honest, risk management is a very, very difficult thing. So I would say that the first thing that you need to do is you need to create a risk register and put descriptions in for all of your inherent risks. Um, One really good exercise to do, especially in a small business, it can work really well, especially as the business is expanding, is to get certain thresholds identified by various business entities, like finance, for example. How much money could we lose realistically and have it not be a problem, versus how much money would it take for us to go under, those kind of things, and set up some of those thresholds on a 5-tier scale of like insignificant, low, medium, high, critical, or whatever the words that you want to use. 5 should be the minimum number. If you're using any less than that, you're going to have some pretty glaring gaps in your risk assessment methodology. After that, instead of trying to look at a risk-based perspective, your best bet is going to be going to your senior leadership and asking them what their objectives are, what they need to do for the year, what are their OKRs, what are they being measured against by, whatever the board is, or the president or whomever, and seeing what their top goals are for the year, and then trying to figure out what security aspects are going to help or hinder meeting those OKRs, and then just starting from a very business centric view for identifying and collating those risks. I hope that answered your question. It's often difficult to get the information for a quantified risk rating. What are some tips? Yeah, so I would say one of the things that's super helpful is if you use the FAIR model. The FAIR model is pretty good at helping you understand what you need to do to gather information, um, and it really genuinely depends on the space that you're in. So I live in the privacy and compliance space, so I'm lucky enough to have several databases of like the fines associated with, certain infractions or another. But at the end of the day, in order to genuinely quantify a risk, like let's say you want to have a risk of ransomware, for example, your baseline needs to be what are your operational costs per day versus your revenue, right? So if you're down for a day, that's fine. If you're down for 3 months, is that gonna put the company under? So, starting from a baseline perspective of, getting those types of numbers, especially if you can get it on a monthly or ideally a daily basis to know, what the cost and the revenue is per day. That will give you a really, really good starting point for being able to quantify certain types of risk. Now, when we're talking about things like whether or not to patch a vulnerability, that starts to be a much more complex answer. Part of that is because uh, one of the things that's often missing from our engineers is that they don't take the time to understand, like, does this vulnerability actually exist in our environment? So as I'm sure many of you know, a risk is a threat, a vulnerability, and an asset. If you're missing any of those things, there is no risk. The risk does not exist. It's also really important to note that you can never completely close a risk unless you can completely get rid of one of those three things. And typically, you're never going to be able to get rid of threats and vulnerabilities in their entirety. So it's more about removing the assets if you want to completely eliminate the risk. Um, Even if you transfer the risk, transferred risk is still a shared risk. So it's super important to understand that. So I would say, again, just some general tips. The the best thing to do is to start gathering your data now. Um, Probability of you being attacked is difficult, right? So, to senior management, with how likely are we to get hit with ransomware? Uh, yes. Cool. This is a great question, Chuck. I appreciate you asking this. So, um, this is one of the scenarios where it's really, really important that we maybe take a step back and understand or reevaluate how we look at the concept of likelihood. So for a long time, likelihood was just a measure of like, what is the probability that this is actually going to happen, which can be effective for some risk rating methodologies. Um, However, what I've been seeing a lot more of recently is using likelihood as more of a measure of your control effectiveness. So when you're looking at it as a rating of your control effectiveness, the idea here would be you look at the risk from the idea of it is absolutely going to happen. If it happens, what is the risk to like what is the impact to the business? And I apologize, I think I may have inadvertently flipped risk and impact at one point, which is a vocabulary mistake that none of us should be making. So you want to know what the impact of the business is, right? So, uh, so once you know the impact, the next thing to do to understand the likelihood is to understand the likelihood of this risk actually manifesting. So how do you realistically do that? Like, maybe a script kiddie can get into your systems if they're not properly patched, but like, what are the chances? I mean, if a script kiddie can get in there, what are the chances that your business is well known enough that they're even going to try? There's so many subjective unknowns in this idea of likelihood that it's often better to look at controls effectiveness as a at least a partial measure in your quest to understand likelihood. So Chuck, if that doesn't answer your question, please feel free to let me know. You can look at other criteria such as whether the vulnerability is publicly disclosed and whether it has been included in known malware kits in the wild. Well known enough in my experience, it doesn't matter. Yeah, so yeah, so this is definitely an interesting one. I remember I had built out a process for determining whether or not a risk assessment was necessary, and of the um, of the 8 criteria, one of them was, has it shown up in mainstream news? And the reason that that's in there is because, even the most dedicated and knowledgeable cybersecurity professional is never going to be able to get around a CEO that wakes up in the middle of the night watching CNN and hearing Dave Kennedy talk about some new like vulnerability. They're going to call the CISO. The CISO is going to call you. So that's I mean, whether or not, like, even going beyond publicly disclosed into the realm of, like, mainstream news coverage is always a good place to start from that aspect. Um, Chuck and Russell, is it okay to use some of the information? Yeah, yeah, go for it. Just again, we did have this disclaimer at the beginning. It's important to know that this is an entirely hypothetical presentation. It is not reflective of the practices of the company that I work for. Um, yeah, but other than that, it's 100% all my material. So if you want to use bits and pieces of it, feel free to chop it up however you want. I do see that we are 5 minutes over. I have thanks, Chuck. I don't have anything until I don't have anything for the next 5-10 minutes, so I'm happy to no, 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 not at all, Chuck. I appreciate the positive response, Roger. Uh, yeah, so I do have some additional slides related to specifically like aligning risk language, and some stuff like that. Uh, Thank you, Michael. Yeah, feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. For those of you who are still here, I see there's 17 of you. I am a moderator on a Discord server. It's the only cybersecurity Discord server of its kind, as opposed to being a hacking specific. It is a holistic cybersecurity with it's a holistic cybersecurity server that has members from all over the world. We have 24/7 coverage from our moderators, thousands of members. If you ever want to join, it's everybody from people who are interested in the topic of cybersecurity all the way up to seasoned professionals. One of the moderators is the CISO for a very, very large international European bank. I myself am a moderator. We have a few other folks in there. Don't want to give up too much personal information, but please feel free to join that. Would love to have you or anybody else that you can think of. The Discord link, give me just a second to bring it up. Come on, Discord. It's going to take just a second here. It's giving me the little spinning Discord head here. Okay, so while that's coming up, I have not seen any discussions yet on the Twitter whistleblower. I typically tend to stay in the privacy space. I'm the primary moderator for specifically like privacy, compliance, risk, etc. So it may have happened in another one, but honestly, with the number of channels that we have, it can be a little cumbersome to stay on top of all of them. So it's not to say that it is not happening, but please feel free to hop into the server here. I'm getting the link right now, and start a discussion. Would be happy to do that. Let's see, invite people. Copy, and there you go. There's the Discord link. Cool. All right. Yeah, we're about 10 minutes over. I really appreciate everybody hopping in here. Please feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn if you so choose. It is I'll bring it up here, post it in the chat. Should just be linkedin .com slash SWI T as in Tom, Z as in zebra. Or you can just look me up by the name that's been plastered all over all this stuff. It's Steven Switz. I believe it is LinkedIn slash Switz. All right. Thank you very much to everybody who attended. I'm gonna go have lunch. It's almost noon here in San Francisco. So have a great day, everyone, and please let me know if you need anything else.